The pattern no one wanted to see. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe, because this story doesn't just unfold, it tightens around you. Like the streets of this city, it watches in silence. And by the end of tonight, you might understand why some names are never spoken out loud. The sirens cut through the cold night air just after 2:13 a.m. Red and blue lights bounced off the rain-soaked pavement of West Harlow Avenue, washing the quiet neighborhood in pulses of color. A patrol officer stood frozen behind his cruiser, staring at the mouth of a narrow alley between a closed bakery and a pawn shop. Steam rose from a sewer grate nearby, twisting into the air like something alive. Halfway down the alley, beneath a flickering security light, a body lay face down on the concrete. Detective Elena Marquez stepped under the yellow tape 20 minutes later, her boots splashing through shallow puddles. She didn't rush. She never did. The first few seconds at a scene told you more than the next 6 hours. The victim was male. Early 30s. Well-dressed, not expensive, but deliberate. No wallet. No phone. No visible defensive wounds. Just a single, precise injury that suggested control rather than chaos. Third one in 8 months, Officer Bennett muttered quietly as Marquez crouched beside the body. She didn't respond, but she knew he was right. 3 men. 3 different neighborhoods. No robbery pattern. No connection on paper. And yet every scene felt the same, as if someone had rehearsed it. The media had begun calling it coincidence. The department called it under review. But the officers working the streets had another word for it. They didn't know whose. They didn't even know if he existed. But somewhere between the second and third case, a quiet understanding formed. Someone was moving through the city untouched. And people were afraid. By sunrise, news vans lined the block. Reporters spoke in careful tones about ongoing investigations and isolated incidents. But inside the precinct, the atmosphere was heavier than anything the cameras captured. Captain Roland Pierce stood at the front of the briefing room, hands braced against the table. Behind him, 3 crime scene photos were pinned to a board. The alley. A parking structure. A quiet riverside park. "Tell me why these aren't connected," he demanded. Silence answered him. Elena finally spoke. "Because someone doesn't want them to be." That was the first time the room truly felt it, the suggestion that this wasn't random violence. It was intention. The victims shared no friends. No workplaces. No criminal history. Different social circles. Different routines. But when forensic reports were laid side by side, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Each victim's phone had vanished without a trace. Security cameras in the immediate area had malfunctioned within minutes of the estimated time of death. And perhaps most unsettling, witnesses existed. They just wouldn't talk. In the second case, a bartender claimed he saw the victim leave with someone. When detectives returned the next morning for a formal statement, the bartender had suddenly remembered nothing. In the third case, a jogger told police she noticed a man watching from across the park just before dusk. When pressed for details, she withdrew her statement entirely. Fear spreads differently than rumors. It doesn't shout. It settles. Elena requested access to citywide surveillance grids, traffic cameras, and cell tower pings. She worked 18-hour days, stitching together fragments of movement across boroughs. A black sedan appeared within a mile radius of 2 crime scenes. No license plate visible. No clear driver profile. But it was something. Her partner, Detective Marcus Hale, leaned over her desk late one evening as the precinct emptied. "You're chasing a shadow," he said. "No," she replied quietly, zooming in on a grainy still image. "I'm chasing someone who knows how we think." The sedan belonged to a shell company registered out of state. No listed employees. No digital footprint beyond a mailing address that led to an abandoned office suite. Whoever orchestrated this wasn't impulsive. They were patient. Meanwhile, the city council demanded reassurance. Community leaders requested town halls. Social media buzzed with theories: gang initiation, organized crime, random predator. But on the streets of West Harlow, shop owners began closing earlier. Late-night foot traffic thinned. Parents called their adult children just to hear their voices. The fear wasn't loud. It was constant. Then came the fourth incident, not a body, but a disappearance. Daniel Whitaker, a 29-year-old financial analyst, left his downtown office at 9:47 p.m. He texted his sister at 10:02 p.m. saying he was heading home. He never arrived. His car was found 2 days later in a public garage. No signs of struggle. Phone missing. Elena stood in the parking structure, staring at the empty driver's seat. It was too familiar. Too careful. Hale joined her with a folder tucked under his arm. "You need to see this." Back at the precinct, he laid out bank records across the table. Each of the 3 deceased victims, and now Daniel, had withdrawn large sums of cash within 48 hours of their deaths or disappearance. Not stolen. Withdrawn willingly. Elena felt something shift. They met someone, she said slowly, or they paid someone. The question was why. Digging deeper, the team uncovered encrypted messaging apps installed briefly on 2 victims' devices before they vanished. Accounts deleted. Data scrubbed. But timestamps remained. Someone had contacted them first. The breakthrough came from an unlikely place, a maintenance worker named Arthur Klein. He serviced the parking garage where Daniel's car was found. Initially, he told officers he noticed nothing unusual. 3 days later, he called back. His voice shook as he asked to speak off record. He admitted that on the night Daniel disappeared, he saw a man standing near the elevator bank. Still watching. Did he approach you? Elena asked gently. Arthur swallowed. No. But he looked at me like he already knew me. Can you describe him? Arthur hesitated too long. That's the thing, he whispered. I can't. He remembered the coat. Dark gray. Tailored. He remembered the posture. Straight, controlled. But the face felt blank in his memory, like it had been deliberately erased. Before leaving, Arthur turned back. He wasn't worried, he said. Not about cameras. Not about being seen. It was like he knew none of it would matter. That night, Elena requested a full forensic sweep of the parking structure's electrical systems. What they found froze the entire task force. A secondary signal interceptor had been installed inside the main control panel, sophisticated, compact, designed to override camera feeds within a limited radius. It wasn't amateur equipment. It required technical skill and access. Access someone inside the system would have. Captain Pierce stared at the device under fluorescent lights. This isn't random, he said. Elena nodded, her pulse steady but her thoughts racing. The black sedan. The erased phones. The fear that silenced witnesses. The manipulated surveillance. Whoever this was, he wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was moving through infrastructure. And when technicians traced the purchase of the interceptor's components, the trail didn't lead to the dark web or overseas accounts. It led to a procurement order approved through a municipal vendor database. Authorized by a city contractor with clearance to access multiple public facilities. A man whose name had appeared quietly on maintenance logs across 3 crime scenes. When they pulled his personnel file, the room fell silent. Because the photograph staring back at them was painfully ordinary. Mid-40s. Unremarkable. The kind of man no one would look at twice. And according to internal records, he had been present, officially and legitimately, within 100 yards of every single victim before they vanished. Elena closed the file slowly. For years, his name had meant nothing. But as she looked around the room, she understood something chilling. It was about to mean everything. And when they ran his background through deeper clearance channels, one final detail surfaced. Sealed disciplinary reports, quietly buried years earlier. Reports that hinted he had once been investigated and quietly cleared. The evidence back then had disappeared. Elena met Hale's eyes across the table. If he's done this before, she said, we're not just chasing a killer. She paused, the weight of it settling in. We're chasing someone who already beat the system. And as the team prepared a warrant to search his registered property, none of them realized that inside his modest suburban home, behind a locked basement door reinforced from the inside, waited the piece of evidence that would change the case forever. The basement door. The warrant was signed at 3:42 a.m. By 5:15, the quiet suburban street was sealed off. Early commuters slowed their cars, confused by the line of unmarked vehicles parked along the curb. The house looked painfully ordinary, beige siding, trimmed hedges, a porch light still glowing against the gray dawn. If fear had an address, no one would have guessed it was here. Elena Marquez stepped out of the lead vehicle, her breath visible in the cold morning air. Detective Marcus Hale moved beside her, silent, focused. Uniformed officers took position around the perimeter. The name on the mailbox read, Adrian Voss. 46. Municipal infrastructure contractor. Divorced. No children. No criminal record. Known for punctuality, reliability, and a near-obsessive attention to detail. The kind of man people trusted with access to the city's most critical systems. Elena knocked firmly. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Pierce gave the signal. The front door gave way after one controlled strike from the battering ram. Officers flooded inside, clearing room by room. The living room was immaculate. Neutral furniture. Framed landscape photography on the walls. A faint scent of cleaning solution lingered in the air. Kitchen clear. Upstairs clear. Garage clear. No sign of Adrian Voss. Elena walked slowly through the hallway, studying everything. Nothing was out of place. No overturned furniture. No packed suitcase. No hurried exit. Which meant one of two things: he wasn't expecting them, or he had already calculated their arrival. Basement door, an officer called out. It was at the end of the hallway, partially concealed behind a narrow linen closet. Reinforced steel frame. Deadbolt on the outside, and another locking mechanism installed on the inside. Who reinforces a basement like that? Hale muttered. Someone who doesn't want it opened, Elena replied. The locksmith worked quickly, sweat forming along his brow despite the cold air drifting in from the broken front door. When the final bolt gave way, the door creaked open. A rush of stale air hit them. The lights inside were already on. The basement wasn't cluttered like most storage spaces. It was organized, obsessively so. Metal shelving units lined the walls. Labeled plastic bins. A central work table under bright fluorescent strips. And along the far wall, mounted neatly in rows, were phones. Dozens of them. Each one tagged with a small adhesive label, dates written in black marker. Elena stepped closer, her pulse hammering in her ears. Some of the dates matched the victims. Others predated the first known case. Jesus, Hale whispered. They moved deeper into the room. A locked cabinet stood beside the work table. Inside were encrypted hard drives, stacks of printed documents, and several sealed envelopes marked with initials. Victims' initials. But there were more envelopes than known victims. Elena opened one carefully. Inside was a photograph, candid, taken from a distance. A man sitting at an outdoor cafe. Time-stamped 2 weeks before his death. Below it, typed notes. Routine observations. Daily schedule. Favorite parking locations. Financial habits. He hadn't chosen them randomly. He had studied them. On the work table sat a laptop, powered on but password protected. Forensic techs moved in immediately, photographing everything before touching a single key. In the far corner of the basement, another door stood partially ajar. Unlike the reinforced entrance, this one was simple wood. Elena pushed it open slowly. Inside was a small, soundproofed room. No windows. A single chair bolted to the floor. A drain embedded in the concrete beneath it. The room was clean. Too clean. Hale exhaled sharply. He brought them here. Elena nodded, her mind racing through timelines. The cash withdrawals. The encrypted apps. The erased security footage. He hadn't attacked them in public. He had convinced them to follow him. For what? A call came from upstairs. You need to see this. In Voss's home office, detectives had uncovered a filing cabinet hidden behind a false wall panel. Inside were city infrastructure maps, detailed layouts of surveillance grids, electrical hubs, maintenance tunnels. Highlighted routes connected areas near each crime scene. He hadn't just known where cameras were. He had controlled them. Then the forensic tech at the basement stairs called out. We're in. They had bypassed the laptop encryption. Elena descended the steps quickly. On the screen was a series of folders labeled by year. The earliest dated back nearly 9 years. Inside each folder were subfiles, names, photographs, financial records, psychological profiles. Some were marked incomplete. Others were labeled successful. A silence settled over the basement as everyone absorbed what that meant. He had been doing this far longer than anyone imagined. "Play that," Hale said quietly, pointing to a video file in the most recent folder. The screen flickered. Grainy footage appeared, interior basement camera angle. The sound was low but clear enough. Daniel Whitaker sat in the chair. Alive. His hands were not restrained. Across from him, out of frame, a voice spoke calmly. "You understand why you're here." Daniel's voice trembled. "You said it was an investment opportunity. You said—" "You chose to come," the voice interrupted, almost gently. "You chose the money." The video ended abruptly. Elena felt the room tilt. This wasn't random violence. It was recruitment. He had lured them with something: financial opportunity, secrecy, exclusivity. And once they stepped inside his world, he owned the narrative. Another file contained spreadsheets detailing transfers of funds through layered shell accounts. The victim's withdrawn cash was tracked meticulously, absorbed, redistributed, laundered. He hadn't just killed them. He had profited from them. But the most disturbing file was labeled simply, projection. Inside was a list of future names. Some crossed out, some highlighted. And at the very bottom, one name none of them expected. Arthur Klein, the maintenance worker who had called back. Hale's blood ran cold. He talked. Elena was already moving. "Get units to Klein's address. Now." They rushed out of the house, sirens igniting as vehicles peeled away from the quiet street. The sun had fully risen now, casting long shadows across manicured lawns, a deceptive calm. When they arrived at Arthur's small apartment complex, his door was ajar. No forced entry. Inside, the television was still on. A half-drunk cup of coffee sat on the table. But Arthur was gone. On the kitchen counter lay a single sheet of paper. Curiosity has consequences. Elena's chest tightened. He knew. He had anticipated their warrant. He had anticipated Arthur's fear. And he had acted faster. Back at the command center, chaos erupted. Patrol units fanned out across the city. Alerts were issued at airports, train stations, highways. But there was no confirmed sighting of Adrian Voss. No unusual withdrawals. No abandoned vehicle. It was as if he had dissolved into the infrastructure he once maintained. Late that evening, a call came in from a patrol officer stationed near the riverfront, the same park where one of the earlier victims had been found. A black sedan was parked illegally near a maintenance gate. Engine still warm. Elena arrived within minutes. The vehicle matched the grainy surveillance stills perfectly. Inside the glove compartment was a single envelope, addressed to Detective Elena Marquez. Her name typed cleanly across the front. Hale stared at her. "Don't." But she opened it. Inside was a photograph, taken earlier that day. From a distance. It showed her standing outside Arthur Klein's apartment building. Below the image, a handwritten note. "You're closer than the others. Don't disappoint me." Elena's pulse slowed instead of quickened. Because this wasn't escape. It was escalation. He wasn't running. He was playing. And somewhere in the city, Arthur Klein was either terrified or already part of a new file labeled successful. As night fell over the skyline, one truth became undeniable. Adrian Voss had spent years perfecting control, over systems, over victims, over fear itself. Now he had added a new name to his board. Elena's. And the next move would determine who truly understood the rules of this game. Control. By midnight, the city felt different. Not louder. Not quieter. Just aware. Every patrol unit was running on edge. Every dispatcher listened twice before logging a call. The man who had hidden inside infrastructure for nearly a decade was no longer invisible. He was deliberate. And now, he was personal. Elena stood in the command center staring at the photograph Adrian Voss had left in the sedan. the image of her outside Arthur Klein's apartment. He wants you reactive, Captain Pierce said carefully. That's what this is. Elena didn't look away from the photo. No. He wants me precise. She turned to Hale. He escalated because we interrupted the pattern. Arthur wasn't scheduled. Hale caught on. You think he only moves when his system predicts stability? Exactly. Arthur was improvisation. Sloppy. And the note? Hale asked. Elena folded the paper slowly. That's control. He needs it back. For the first time since the case broke open, they weren't chasing shadows. They were inside his psychology. Voss selected men with predictable routines and financial pressure points. He approached them with exclusivity, investment opportunities, private contracts, discrete side channels. He studied compliance, measured risk tolerance, evaluated greed, desperation, ambition. If they passed, he advanced them to phase 2. If they hesitated, he marked them incomplete. And if they panicked, if they threatened exposure, they became successful. But Arthur Klein hadn't fit the mold. Arthur had been incidental, a witness, which meant Voss acted fast and emotional. Emotional was traceable. Run traffic cam data near Arthur's apartment from 30 minutes before he called us to 1 hour after, Elena ordered. Focus on utility access vehicles and contractor vans. By 2:17 a.m., a match surfaced. A municipal service van registered to a subcontractor Voss had worked with in the past. The plate was real, but the GPS tracking unit embedded in the fleet had gone offline for exactly 48 minutes that evening. 48 minutes was enough. The van's last known ping placed it near an abandoned water treatment facility on the industrial edge of the city, a property decommissioned 5 years ago but still technically under municipal oversight. Oversight Voss once managed. Pierce didn't hesitate this time. Move. The convoy rolled out under a sky heavy with low clouds. No sirens. No lights. The facility loomed against the riverbank, massive concrete tanks, rusted catwalks, shattered windows reflecting faint moonlight. Wind whistled through broken panels, creating a hollow, metallic echo. They entered through a side access door that had been recently forced, not violently but cleanly. Controlled. Inside, the air smelled of oil and damp cement. Elena, Hale whispered, pointing. Fresh tire tracks cut through a thin layer of dust. They followed them deeper into the complex until the corridor opened into a large filtration chamber. And there, under harsh portable floodlights, sat a folding chair. Arthur Klein was tied to it, alive, dazed but conscious. Across the room, Adrian Voss stood calmly beside a metal railing overlooking one of the empty treatment basins. He wore a dark gray coat. Tailored, just as Arthur had described. You're right on schedule, Voss said, his voice steady, almost conversational. Officers fanned out instantly, weapons raised. Step away from the railing. Pierce commanded. Voss smiled faintly. You've been studying me. I respect that. Elena stepped forward, lowering her weapon slightly but not her focus. It's over, Adrian. He tilted his head. Is it? Arthur stirred weakly in the chair. He said you'd come? Of course I did, Voss replied softly. Predictability is comforting. Elena's mind raced. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't cornered. He was calculating. You built this entire structure because you needed control, she said evenly. But you made a mistake. Voss's expression flickered, curiosity, not fear. Did I? You deviated from your own system. Arthur wasn't selected. He wasn't groomed. He was reactive. And reaction creates exposure. For a brief moment, silence settled between them. You think this is about money? Voss asked quietly. Or violence? Then what is it about? Hale demanded. Voss's eyes shifted back to Elena. Optimization. The word hung in the cold air. I identified inefficiencies, he continued. Financial recklessness. Weakness disguised as ambition. I offered opportunity. They chose risk. And when they wanted out? Elena pressed. They had already demonstrated instability. Arthur whimpered softly. Elena took another step forward. You don't optimize people. You eliminate them. Voss's jaw tightened slightly, the first crack in composure. You don't understand scale, he said. The city runs on invisible systems. Maintenance schedules. Power grids. Data streams. Order exists because someone ensures it. And you decided that someone was you? Pierce shot back. Voss didn't answer. Instead, his hand moved subtly toward the railing. Elena saw it first. Don't, she shouted. But he was faster. He pressed a small device concealed in his palm. Across the chamber, a low mechanical hum activated. Water began surging into the empty basin below, thousands of gallons redirected from a nearby reserve tank. Arthur's chair was positioned directly above a drainage channel. Stop the flow! Hale yelled into his radio. Officers scrambled toward the control valves mounted along the far wall. You wanted escalation, Voss said calmly over the rising roar. This is escalation. Elena advanced steadily, ignoring the chaos. You don't want to die, she said firmly. Voss's eyes locked onto hers. This was never about survival. The basin below began filling rapidly. Within seconds, water reached the lower grates. Hale managed to wrench one of the emergency shutoff levers, but it jammed halfway. Elena, he shouted. She was 10 feet from Voss now. You need witnesses, she said quietly. You need recognition. If you die here, you're just another contractor who snapped. That hit. Just barely. The hum faltered as Hale and 2 officers forced the second valve closed. The water flow slowed, then stopped, leaving the basin partially filled but no longer rising. Arthur sobbed in relief. Voss looked down at the halted surge, then back at Elena. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. You were careful, she continued. Meticulous. But you miscalculated one variable. And what's that? He asked. You thought fear was permanent. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance as backup units arrived. Officers moved in cautiously. Voss didn't resist. He let them take the device from his hand. Let them cuff him. As they escorted him toward the exit, he leaned slightly toward Elena. You're still on the list, he whispered. Hours later, the facility was cleared. Arthur was transported safely to the hospital. Evidence teams secured everything Voss had brought with him, including another envelope. Inside were updated files, projected timelines, and at the very bottom, partially highlighted but not yet finalized, Elena Marquez. 3 months passed. The trial dominated national headlines. Prosecutors unveiled years of digital records, financial laundering trails, psychological documentation. Families of victims finally heard the full scope of what had been done. Adrian Voss never denied the structure. Only the interpretation. He was convicted on multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Sentenced to life without parole. The city exhaled. Security systems were overhauled. Oversight committees restructured municipal access protocols. Public trust began its slow repair. But control leaves residue. One evening, long after the trial concluded, Elena sat alone at her desk reviewing archived case materials. Her phone buzzed. A known number. She hesitated, then opened the message. No text. Just an image. A photograph of the abandoned water treatment facility. Taken that day. Attached was a single line. Systems adapt. Her blood ran cold. Voss was in maximum security confinement. No device access. No unsupervised communication. The metadata on the image showed it had been captured hours earlier. From outside the perimeter fence. She immediately called Hale. Tell me no one else had access to his projection files. Silence lingered on the other end. Elena, Hale said carefully. There were references to collaborators we never identified. Secondary observers. Her eyes drifted to the evidence board still mounted across the office wall. Names crossed out. Names circled. Names incomplete. Voss had built a system. And systems don't collapse when one component is removed. They evolve. Elena stood slowly, staring at the photograph glowing in her hand. Somewhere in the city, Someone else understood the blueprint. Someone patient. Someone studying routines. And somewhere, quietly, another file might already be labeled successful. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for what comes next. Stay close.